Welcome to Minutes with Mango, Life in Motion. I'm your host, Johnny Mango. This is the place where we inquire about lifestyle, culture, and careers. Weekly, we meet with new guests that make a contribution of their insightful stories about their careers and how those careers impact their lifestyle and culture. Hello, everybody. This is Johnny Mango, and today we have a guest that kind of ties in with some of our other podcasts, and it has to do with that invisible energy that transpires between people. And we've heard in the last few podcasts that I've done from some folks who've spoken about spirituality in different ways. And today we have a guest that has done a lot of work in what he calls Vibe, V-I-B-E. And he has a PhD in communications, and he's been working on Vibe for over 30 years, so he knows a lot about it, and can't wait to hear from him what he thinks Vibe is and how it can affect all of us. So I'd like to introduce you to Jason Delgandino. And hello, Jason.
Johnny, how are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us today. We always like to start the same way here at Minutes with Mango. Tell us about yourself and about your background and how you got into Vibe.
Yeah, sure. So, first, obviously, thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate it, and I want to say hello to all the listeners out there. So, again, my name is Jason Delgandio, and I'm a college professor at Temple University in Philadelphia. Now, at Temple University, my expertise is the theory and practice of social justice with a focus on activism and social movements. However, outside of Temple, my other expertise is the study of vibes, as you were saying before. Now, I know for some listeners that may sound like a strange subject, like how do you study a vibe, what is it, all those kinds of things, and that's really the whole point. I've been studying this for approximately 30 years, going back to my late teens, and then progressing throughout the years. In terms of how I got involved with this, well, first I grew up in a household when I was younger where the word was always used. And we didn't know how to explain it, no one had to define it. If you said a vibe, you just kind of knew what it was. Then in my late teens, I got involved in various subcultures and countercultures, underground scenes, rave scene, jam bands, concerts, underground parties, etc. And in all of these spaces and all of these scenes, the word vibe was commonly used, and including by me. The vibe of the band, the vibe of the DJ, the vibe of the dance floor, and so on. And at some point, I started to think about this thing we call the vibe. Like, what are we all talking about? What are we experiencing? And I went from there. I wrote my first paper on the vibe as a college student in a class on nonverbal communication. Then I went to graduate school and used my master's thesis and my doctoral dissertation to create my own philosophy of the vibe referred to as bodily emanation. In other words, the body emanates or radiates an actual feeling or energy out into the world that other bodies then experience and feel. And then from there, it's progressed over the years to the point now where I'm sitting here having podcast conversations with people like you.
Wow. So, Jason, is it an energy? Is that what a vibe is? Is it an energy between people?
Well, yeah. So there are all kinds of ways we might define a vibe. The most basic way that I can think of is that a vibe is the exchange of energy between you and other people. So again, an exchange of energy between you and other people. Now, From there, though, you have to think about, like, what is the nature of this energy? Are we just substituting one word for another? All right. So, for instance, is a vibe a physical phenomenon or a metaphysical phenomenon? Is it a material phenomenon or an immaterial phenomenon? Or is it a scientific phenomenon or perhaps a spiritual phenomenon? Or maybe it's all these things at once.
Yeah. I've talked to a number of people who would, in the past month and a half, who would describe it as a metaphysical energy. But what's your take? Do you think it's physical energy, metaphysical, or?
Well, I pose this as a question to your listeners, and this is my common take on it when I do podcasts, because I'm inviting listeners to think about this thing for themselves. And I say that because I'm one person, and I'm not trying to sit here and tell everyone exactly what it is. And I do think, though, it is all these things at the same time, depending upon which lens you look at it. So in terms of a physical vibration, there is physical vibrations. All sound is a physical vibration. But at the same time, perhaps it's also metaphysical. And so it's hard for me to say, well, it's only a physical phenomenon based on certain experience I've had throughout life where it seems to transcend the physical dimension. So That's why when I say it can be all these things at the same time, really depending upon your background, your worldview, your experiences, we can talk about it in different kinds of ways, and you can still walk away thinking about vibes in very concrete ways that are meaningful to you personally.
Yeah, I can really relate to that. Years ago, I used to travel a lot in my career, and at different times, I would go from state to state. And I always found it fascinating that literally when you cross a state line, there was a different vibe.
Sure.
I mean, I lived in Vermont for a while, and I'd drive in the New York State, and immediately there was a different vibe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what you're touching on. So that's I would call that a collective vibe, maybe. But and so then it kind of gets down to personal, and like you described, you went to you in the jam band thing, and probably went to what rave parties or whatever you did, different parties and different things. And there was probably that vibe going on. That same thing with probably a sporting event. There's a vibe.
Yeah.
So wherever there's entities, there's a vibe, like human entities.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, it's one of the reasons why early on in my career I refer to it as bodily emanation, because I want to concretize our understanding of this thing we call a vibe. So, for example, I've never encountered a body that didn't give off a vibe. And then when we experience a vibe, it is through our bodies. We are embodied beings, which is not to say there might not be life after death and all those kinds of things. But right here and right now, we're on this planet and we are physical creatures. And then we do give off a vibe. And like you said before, it could be an individual vibe, a collective vibe in terms of small groups or large groups. It could be the vibe of a city, a town, a state, a whole country, so on and so on and so on.
Right. So I guess the big question is, how do we tap into the vibe of other people? Is there a way to do that? Is there a way to recognize that?
Yeah, there is. Now, I've been doing a bunch of these podcasts for the past couple of years, and that's a question people always ask. And early on, it was hard for me to answer because for me personally, I've always been able to feel a vibe. Like it was second nature to me. I didn't have to think about it. Having said all of that, though, some basic steps that I walk people through is first, try to become more aware of your body. In other words, how do you feel on the inside? How do you feel on the outside? And so on. Then also, how are you experiencing your surroundings? In other words, try to be more aware of your surroundings. Where are you? Who are you with? Etc. All right. Then from there, though, try to soften your perception and soften your ego. And I say that because you're trying to think more with your subconscious mind or your bodily intelligence rather than your conscious mind. The conscious mind is like a little peephole that we see through, but there's much more going on in the environment than just your conscious mind, and your body is in contact with the environment. Then from there, though, try to imagine your body radiating out to the world. And then from there, try to lean into this exchange of energy. In some ways, it's becoming more aware of where you're at and how you feel. Other ways, it's about softening your ego and being more in touch with your body and your surroundings. And then from there, though, try to envision this exchange of energy actually happening.
You know, one of the things that I've always found fascinating is even in a public space, walking down the sidewalk or walking into a room of people that you don't know, and there's certain people that are attractive and certain people that are unattractive, and it's not their physical appearance, something else that would lead me to one person but not the other. I don't know if you've ever had that yourself, but that, to me...
Well, yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's what we're talking about here. That's an exchange of energy, no doubt about that. It happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
Whether you're at a concert or you're in your work office or you're at the grocery store. I mean, literally, if you learn how to tap into the vibe, you'll realize it's happening all the time around you.
Right. So it's a matter of being conscious of the vibe.
Yeah, 100%, right? And so part of my work is trying to elevate that to a conscious way of life. How do I help other people understand their experience, articulate their experience, but then also be more in touch with their experience of vibes?
Yeah. You think somebody can modulate that vibe?
Sure. I mean, I think we do it all the time, whether we think about it or not. So I begin with the idea that every person has a core vibe similar to a core personality. But if you think about it, you're never the same person all the time. And yeah, you have a core personality that we all recognize and respond to, which will allow us to recognize us as Jason or Johnny. At the same time, though, I mean, depending on what's happening, you're in a good mood, a bad mood, happy mood, downtrodden, sleepy, awake, all those kinds of things. And so your vibe is fluctuating all the time. But now the trick becomes how to become aware of this and gain more conscious control over how to control my vibe.
So how does one control it?
Well, that's not easy to do, and it really comes down to practice. It really is. Years ago, when I first got involved with vibes, I thought, oh, this happens by itself. You don't have to think about it. But it's really not true. It's like anything else. So as an analogy here, we all breathe, but you can learn to breathe differently, to breathe better, to breathe more consciously, and so on. Same thing with a vibe, right? And so first you have to be aware of vibes in general, then be aware of your vibe, and the trick really comes down to how do you project the right vibe at the right time with the right people? And just think about different scenarios. So if you're going a job interview, right, you're going to give off a certain kind of vibe to persuade this person to hire you. As opposed to, I don't know, going on a first date. What kind of vibe do you give off then? As opposed to if you're raising kids, and how do you discipline them in a way that makes them realize, okay, this is wrong, but also not hurting them at the same time, right? So it's really about being in touch with your own bodily emanation, your own vibe, and then adjusting that as necessary, depending upon the circumstances, the situation, the people, and so on.
You know what comes to mind is well, I'm dating myself now, but there's an old Seinfeld episode where George Costanza's the character in Seinfeld who's always lacking in. He's always challenging his own integrity. How's that sound? There's a scene where he is complaining to the others about he never has anything and he can never find a woman, all that kind of stuff. And somebody says to him, "Well, why don't you change what you're doing? Why don't you go in the opposite direction?" And so he says, "Yeah, I'm going to do that." And he was sitting in a restaurant, so instead of ordering his regular sandwich, he says, "No, stop. I want to order something completely opposite of that." Okay. And then all of a sudden, Seinfeld sitting next to him and he says to him, "George, there's a woman over there that keeps checking you out." He goes, "Me?" And Seinfeld says, "Well, why don't you go do something about that?" And he says, "Oh, no, I couldn't do that." And he said, "Well, wait a minute. I'm doing the opposite, so that's what I'm going to do." And it was like he changed his vibe.
Sure.
And he went over and introduced himself to this woman in a totally different mindset, and she became attracted to him. As an example, I can't believe I'm using Seinfeld as an example, but this whole thing where it's a demonstration of somebody changing within themselves to accomplish something.
No, I think that's actually a good example, and it touches upon a lot of different points. So first, when we think about the vibe, it's not separate from everything else. It's part of a package deal in terms of being human. And if you want to change your vibe, sometimes you have to change your daily practices, your habits, your mindsets, etc. And then, so from there, for instance, as a personal example, during the semester, I often get very stressed out because I'm working so much. And at some point I have to realize, okay, well, if I'm stressed out all the time, that means I'm in a bad mood, and it's bad for me, it's bad for the people around me, etc. So I have to rethink my daily routine and actually change certain things in my life that will change my emotional state, will change my psychology, will change my outlook, and thereby also change my vibe. So it's not just like wave my magic wand and I'll change my vibe. You have to put in the necessary work to change lots of things to change your vibe, which is not a bad thing. It just takes effort and practice.
Yeah, I think there's also vibe evolution that are, I'm thinking about personal relationships like marriage and things like that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
We hear so much about divorce and people breaking up. And the other thing that I think is going on in our culture currently is we're impacted with so much information more than ever before.
Sure.
All that information coming into us is really probably, I'm guessing, affecting our vibe.
I totally agree with both examples. Yeah, 100%. So going in reverse here, or actually being with the first one, let's say. So think about your romantic partner. Think about your best friend. Think about your work colleagues. Think about your family members, etc. And there's a vibrational relationship to each one of those people. And
Yes.
if in some relationships, the vibe between you does not necessarily need to change because it is what it is and you both enjoy it. But if each individual starts to change as a person, your vibrational relationship also needs to change and evolve, as you said. If not, then most likely you will no longer be friends, you'll be getting a divorce, etc. So I think that's totally legit, and I think that's spot on.
Yeah.
Then in terms of the larger society, definitely, like I'm not anti social media, I'm not anti-technology. But if you think about the state of the world right now in terms of being swamped by information on a daily basis, that has to have some effect on our psychology, some effect on our emotions, and thereby some effect on our individual vibes, but also the collective vibe. So to stress this here with the collective vibe, there's always a collective vibe happening, right? And you are contributing to that collective vibe, and that collective vibe is affecting you in some kind of way. It's a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, the other thing is that, as we're talking about information gathering, in other words, we're exposing ourselves to tons of information now in our culture. At the same time, we're making our information selective. We're saying, okay, I'm going to tune into this, but I'm not going to tune into that. I'm going to tune into this one over here, but not to that. So all of a sudden we start to develop a narrow view of something rather than a broad view.
I totally agree. And I would say that, so in terms of our, let's say, information bubbles or echo chambers, right? That's obviously contributes to polarization. There's no doubt about that. I mean, that's a fact.
Yeah.
And then I would say the subconscious vibe that we're emanating because of that echo chamber also contributes to polarization.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I'm starting to see it. Just talking to you, I'm starting to.
Now, on the positive, right? On the positive side of that, though, if this is all true, what we're talking about, it means you can decide to change your vibe to a certain degree and in some small way make the world a better place. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say like, well, if I meditate and give off the right vibe, we're going to end all wars and have utopia. I don't think that's possible. But you can make some small difference in your immediate environment and perhaps in the global environment as well.
Yeah. What about meditation?
Mm-hmm.
You brought something up, meditation. I'm actually going to have a former Buddhist monk on in October who's going to talk about meditation and its impact. But what's your take on meditation? When I think about meditation, I think about being holed up in a corner in a dark room with my eyes closed in some kind of lotus position and, in quietness. But what's your take on meditation?
Sure. Well, I think there are lots of overlaps between meditation and vibes for all the obvious reasons. For me personally, though, I started meditating about 10 years ago, give or take. My father passed away. I was emotionally a mess, and I had to do something to just make it through my day. So I started meditating on a daily basis. And that's carried forward now to the year 2025. And I'll meditate every morning, approximately every morning, anywhere from 5 minutes to, say, 30 minutes. And although the description you provided before is kind of the classic meditation state, it doesn't have to look like that. You can meditate in all kinds of ways. And for me personally, though, it's simply about getting in touch with myself on a daily basis, quieting my mind, or releasing the psychological clutter, and basically getting myself right for the rest of the day. Now, there's lots of parallels, though, between the practice of meditation and learning how to tune into vibes. So if you are more present with yourself, more in the moment, you gain more ability to tap into the vibe because you're less in your head and more in your body and more in the world. So I think there's a direct correlation there. And so I think if you do meditate on a regular basis, it will help you develop kind of a vibe discourse, a vibe language, a vibe experience.
So meditation can, what I'm hearing you say is meditation can, number one, affect your personal vibe.
100%.
But it can also affect your interpretation of other vibes.
100%. Yeah, that's a very good way of saying yes, 100%. Yeah. I mean, you're simply more in touch with your surroundings, more in touch with your internal state as well as your external states. And again, that gives you more control over your vibe, more control over to notice other people's vibes, etc.
Right. So there's some there's some psychology in this, there's some spirituality in this, there's some physicality in all this. There's a whole bunch of stuff in this that you describe as vibe.
That's why I always start off earlier, like, what exactly is this thing we call the vibe, right? And if it's like almost like let's say a prism, and if you just turn the prism in one direction or another direction, different things will come to the surface.
And I would think that based on our personal vibe, it would have, we're talking about interpretation for a second, I would think based on our personal vibe is how we're going to interpret our world around us and someone else's vibe.
Sure. So I think what you're saying is that the vibe that I give off will in some way influence how I perceive and experience the wider world around me. And I would agree with that. And to draw, again, another analogy here, it's like your emotional state. If you're in a bad mood, you see bad things. If you're in a good mood, you see good things. Same thing with your vibe.
Right. But at the same time, I think if one is encountering somebody else, let's say I'm in a bad mood, as an example, and I encounter somebody, and they say something to me, and I go, I wonder why they're in such a bad mood, when maybe they're not, but it's my interpretation because you see where I'm going here?
100%. Yeah. The example that just popped in my mind. So let's say I'm a very defensive person, and when we're defensive, we are both figuratively and also literally pushing people away. And so if we translate that into a vibe, my defensive vibe will push the world away as opposed to inviting the world in. Now, sometimes a defensive vibe is necessary for personal safety, right? But that's not always needed. And if you're constantly defensive, you will live an impoverished life, right? So the question is, like we were saying earlier, how do we modulate our vibes depending upon the needs of each situation?
Right. Now you're sneaking up on trust, but we're not going to go into that today. Okay. That's a whole different
Sure.
whole different subject. But I just find this whole thing fascinating because I've done this whole series on what started out on spirituality, and it's gone into all kinds of different areas, and it's actually moving now towards spirituality and business, believe it or not.
Interesting. Okay.
And you're the bridge.
Right.
The vibe.
Yeah.
Explaining the vibe is really the bridge, as I think about it.
Oh, interesting.
So, yeah.
Well, I think of myself as a philosopher, first and foremost as an intellectual, right? So I think about these kinds of things. And I'm very philosophical, I have a very strong philosophical background. And my approach to philosophy has always been, let's say, guided by spiritual interest as well. So to talk about existentialism or to talk about metaphysics, to me, in my mind, that's spiritual, and not necessarily in terms of God or the afterlife, but in terms of the mystery of life and the mystery of the universe and the world.
Yeah. And I think your term vibe is defining the mystery of energy.
No, 100%. Right.
Yeah.
So I've been studying this for 30 years, and my basic question is the same. What the hell are we talking about? What is this thing that we're talking about? It's the same question for 30 years.
Yeah. I had somebody on a few weeks ago that she's more spiritual in nature and kept talking about magic. And I said, can you define magic? And she's like stuck. And I said, well, maybe magic's just the invisible energy in the world. And she went, oh, wow, I think that's it. And and vibe is that same energy, maybe, that we can't see it, but we feel it, we sense it, and it affects our behavior within the world, positive or negative.
No, I agree with that. I like your use of the word magic. We're not talking about card tricks here, but rather the magic of life itself, right?
Yeah.
How do we get here? What's it all about? What happens later on and afterwards? And although there are numerous paradigms that we can point to, no one truly knows for certainty what it's all about. And I think that's what brings it all together. It's like the jazz of life. That's what makes it interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And I wasn't talking about magic from pulling a rabbit out of that.
Right.
Well, so I guess it is possible to change one's vibe then, of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, you can totally do that. Again, It's not easy. It takes practice. You have to form it, make it into a habit, form it as a habit here. You have to experiment. But you can change your vibe. There's no doubt about that. And I would actually encourage your listeners to think about their own vibe, think about the vibes of other people, and then ask themselves, are you happy with your daily vibe? If so, great. Keep improving upon that. If you're not happy with your personal vibe, how much you go about changing your vibe to something you are happy with.
Do other cultures talk about their vibes? Do other cultures besides our own recognize that there's a vibe in the world?
100%. So I'm actually currently working on a book tentatively entitled Vibe Talk: How and Why People Talk About Vibes. And I've been documenting this now for the past couple of years. And there are examples from Portugal, Spain, Germany, Ireland, Japan, China, Thailand, Hong Kong, so on and so on and so on. In some cases, they actually use the English version of the word vibe, right? Actually spelled out in the English version. Other times there are translations. Other times there are other words, but it means the same kind of thing. And so this is a transnational phenomenon happening all across the globe, and also historically. It's not just in the year 2025, but goes back really throughout human history.
Interesting. I have a close relationship with the music world. I'm not a musician or anything, but I have a very close relationship with the music world, and I think the vibe shows up a lot in performance and what I've seen of different music groups and how they stay together or how they break apart. I think it all boils down to the vibe.
Oh, I totally agree, and I think music is a great example, or let's say a case study of the vibe. And in many ways, that's how I first got involved in this whole thing we call the vibe, right? Going to raves, going to concerts, house parties, things like that. And so you have the music that's a physical vibration. But then when you're on a dance floor at a concert and there's thousands of people, there's a collective vibe that you can feel and experience. And if you're watching a band, you can see them vibing on each other. I mean, I don't mean like literally see something, but you can see how they interact with each other. And when they achieve a certain level of, let's say, synchronicity, you know they're in the vibe together as a band.
Yeah, that's just what I was thinking. I know someone who's an improvisational a jazz musician, and they improvise in their performance. And I asked him, I said, how do you know where you stand with the other musicians when you're playing kind of off the cuff like that? He says, you just know. We just know between us what to do. It's not like they rehearsed it in a particular way. They just know. And I think that's that vibe that we're talking about today. You just know. You connect on a different level to be able to go ahead and do something with a group where everybody is somehow connected on a higher level.
I totally agree. And I think live improvisational music is a great example of that, where now they have rehearsed before and they are professionals, things like that. But there's something about when they step on stage and they let go of their ego and they're in the moment, they're present with each other. They're able to jam with each other, play with each other, and anticipate where they're going. And it's almost like they're having their own vibrational conversation in the moment. And you can see it happening.
Yeah, I know someone who plays professionally and on big stages every weekend around the country. And I said, you get bored playing that same music all the time? He says, it's really not the same because we improvise throughout the show. I said, well, how do you do that? He says, well, we just know what to do. And so they'll change up, and I've gone back and watched some of their performances. And sure enough, you can see subtle little changes that you wouldn't notice if you weren't looking for it. But that gives them that little bit of flexibility to be creative. That's that vibe you're talking.
Yeah. No doubt about it. Right. Yeah. So it's just to repeat what you said, it's never the same experience. It's never the same performance, never the same show, because they're in the moment with each other. It's extemporaneous. They're being authentic. They're being genuine, and they're playing off of each other. So it can never be exactly the same.
Right. And so here's the big question. How does somebody shield themselves from negative vibes? What do they do? How do you do that?
That's a really good question. That's something I had to learn over the years, right? So I'm a highly sensitive person, as one might imagine, and I absorb a lot of vibes, and sometimes they're negative vibes. And so in the past few years, I've been trying to practice ways to avoid doing that. So there are different metaphors you can use, but for instance, some people will say they will put on a rubber suit, like, as a metaphor, and the bad vibes bounce off. Other people might put on, let's say, a suit of armor, and when the bad vibes hit, they kind of just drop to the ground. I've heard someone else say it's almost like they have a mirror in front of them. Any kind of bad vibe that comes by them, it just reflects back to the other person. And so it's really for each person, they have to develop their own kind of metaphor of what works. But it's really about observing, but not absorbing. So again, you want to observe what's happening around you. You don't want to ignore the bad vibes, but don't want to absorb those bad vibes. So for example, if you're in a negative work meeting, before you go in, mentally prepare yourself for the possibility of bad vibes. Then when you're there, though, be aware of what's happening, feel those bad vibes, but don't internalize them. And then when you leave that work meeting, make sure you ground yourself and release any of those bad vibes you might have internalized.
Yeah, I think, when you use the term internalize, I think that's one thing I've observed in people is they get a response from somebody and they internalize it, and it really messes them up rather than letting it go.
Yeah. Well, from my own personal experience, again, I'm still working on this. If I go to a bad work meeting or have an argument with someone, I might hold on to that negative energy for hours later, and it's not healthy for you. And so really is an issue of how do I learn to let go of that?
Yeah. Wow. This has been a very interesting conversation, Jason. I hope my listeners get something from it, because I certainly have. Really, it kind of validated a lot of things for me, and it's obvious you've done a lot of work on this, a lot of study, a lot of thinking you've put into this to come up with this whole concept of vibe. Does anybody ever challenge you on that word vibe?
Oh, %. So there's no doubt about that. So I'm being reductive when I say this, but there are basically two kinds of people in the world. There are vibes people and people who are not vibes people. And so in terms of my work, for people who are vibes people, I'm trying to help elevate their understanding of the vibe. For people who are not vibes people, I'm trying to convince them that this vibe thing is a real thing that is worthy of discussion, worthy of intellectual attention, worthy of study.
So it's kind of a self-improvement thing that you're working on.
In some ways, I guess I haven't thought about it in that way, but yeah, 100%, right? If you can learn to use your vibe, tap into it, become more aware, it is a form of self-improvement. So you become potentially a better person, more informed.
So you mentioned you're working on a book. When do you think it's going to be out? Any idea?
Not yet. So it's basically written. I'm still looking for a publisher. It's under review right now with 2 different publishers. If by chance any of your listeners are publishers, feel free to contact me. I haven't signed a contract yet, so I'm still looking. But once I sign a contract, it should come out fairly soon. Maybe within next year or so, maybe. We'll see.
Okay. All right. Wow. Okay. Is there any other way for people to get in touch with you, or are you hiding out, Mr. Vibe?
So they can go to my website, which is 20minutevibe.com. Again, 20minutevibe.com. And the 20 is spelled with the numbers. So it's it's 2. So 20minutevibe.com. From there, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.
Okay. All right. Do you ever offer advice to other people, or is there, is there some good reasons for people to contact you?
Well, yeah, sure. So in terms of my website, 20minutevibe.com, it's really offering, related content for people who are intellectually curious. On there, I have videos, essays, etc. I have self-paced video courses. I'm also available for one-on-one discussions, available for group talks and lectures, the whole bit. So yeah, get in touch with me and I can come by and give you my spiel.
So if we tickled somebody's vibe through this podcast, that's how they can find you and explore more.
100%, yes.
Very good. All right. Well, Jason, I want to thank you for today. To me, it's been very enlightening, and I hope it's enlightening for others. And thanks for stopping by and sharing the vibe with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It was a fun conversation.
You have been listening to Minutes with Mango, Life in Motion. Subscribe to hear a new and unique guest each week as they comment on their life's journey and share experiences with lifestyle, culture, and career. You can always find us at minuteswithmango.com.